What's up, everybody? Welcome to the weekend roundup. Before we get into all of this weekend's action, I wanted to take a minute to acknowledge what happened in Indonesia, express my condolences to everybody impacted by this tragedy. Latest reports I've seen, at least 125 people killed at a soccer stadium following a match between Persebaya Surabaya and Arema FC. Arema FC were hosting, and unfortunately, there was Arema lost. Fans were on the field expressing their disappointment. It should be noted there were no away fans in the stadium due to concerns about rioting, and tear gas was unleashed, led to a panic, and eventually one of those horrifying crush situations where people just get smushed in between each other. Absolutely heartbreaking. The one thing I do want to say moving forward, and Indonesian president's already announced there's going to be an investigation. It's an obvious first step, but it's also an important first step. And what I really hope, to honor the legacy of the people that were unfortunately killed in this, and to just make soccer stadiums a safer place moving forward, because this happens far too often, is that we get some real accountability and transparency here. Too many times when things like this have happened in the past, authorities have just put the blame on fans. You saw it for decades with Hillsborough until finally the truth got uncovered. And you also saw an example of this earlier this year at the Champions League final, when the first message you were hearing was it was Liverpool fans' fault, Liverpool fans showed up late, ticketing issues, whatever that nonsense was. And then finally, after the investigation, people started acknowledging, well, maybe there were some security failures. If we are going to make significant progress in preventing this kind of stuff from ever happening again, that starts with a transparent investigation that actually holds safety, public safety officials accountable. We have to figure out why this happened, how this happened, and what needs to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again. And you cannot do that if everybody's looking for a scapegoat and looking to simply blame fans. There was certainly unruly behavior happening around the stadium. But that doesn't mean we need to get to a point where people are losing their lives. So that is the one thing I wanted to say about this. Again, condolences. Absolutely heartbreaking to hear about this. The best way to try and find some semblance of good out of this is to actually do the hard work and hold people accountable and own up to the mistakes that led to this happening so it doesn't happen again. Back on the soccer field, 2 games to get to in the Premier League, starting with the Manchester derby. It's ultimately a 6-3 win for Manchester City over Manchester United. I'm going to get to United in a second here. But the first thing I want to say, and the first thing I feel obligated to say, is that, off the top of my head, is easily the best I have ever seen Manchester City play. Maybe I'm missing something, and admittedly, I don't watch them week in and week out because I have much better uses of my time than watching them beat, Watford 5-0. Just throwing Watford in there as an example. But in a game of this magnitude against a team of that quality, say whatever you will against United, right? I mean, they had Cristiano Ronaldo and Casemiro on the bench. I have never seen City deliver something quite like this. So that's where I feel obligated to start and where I want to start. Is with Haaland in this team, their ceiling is significantly higher than it was last season. And that is a terrifying thought, right? There are 3, 4, 5 players in the world who could have actually raised this team's ceiling. And they went and got one of them. And they got a player who specifically is optimized by the kind of things Kevin De Bruyne does. You've seen it all season. I mean, for all of the numbers Haaland is putting up, De Bruyne's assist numbers are going to end up being ridiculous at the end of this season as well. Haaland and De Bruyne get the best out of each other. If it was, for example, Kylian Mbappe, sure, De Bruyne helps make him a little bit better, but it's not the same impact as pairing Haaland with De Bruyne. That is one of the 3 or 4 best pure strikers in the world. I would argue he's definitely in the top 3, maybe number 1. And that's the best creative midfielder in the world. There are just days where this is going to happen. And the other part of this is, I also don't remember a game where so many City attacking players were at their best. Jack Grealish and Bernardo Silva were the best 2 players on the field for the first 15 or so minutes at the very beginning of this game, before the goals started coming in. And by the end, you had completely forgotten about him because Phil Foden had 3 goals, Haaland had 5 goal involvements, and Kevin De Bruyne was being Kevin De Bruyne. All 5 of them were spectacular. Part of me just wants to sort of write this one off and say that would have happened to any team that showed up to play them. They were just that good. And nobody in the world can match them when they play like that. Now, on the United side, yes, defensively, certainly some of those issues you've seen in the past came back. They were not good defensively. That doesn't excuse the mistakes that they made. However, the other positive that I want to point to from a United perspective here is, of course, there were defensive lapses. But what you didn't see was some of the glaring mistakes they have made in the past in some of these high-profile losses. Things like the pass David De Gea made to Christian Eriksen against, I believe that was the Brentford game. And, some of the Harry Maguire situations. And they did ultimately get 3 goals and outscore Manchester City in the second half. Now, I get it was 4-0, so you can only put so much stock into that. But they did show up and actually, look semi-competent in the second half. So I think this loss, and I might be wrong about this moving forward, but right now I'm putting this loss in a different category than the previous ones that look like this. To me, this is Rafael Varane and Lautaro Martinez had been excellent together. You can look at the numbers. Those 2 as a center-back pairing have been really, really good. Today, it all fell apart. It's going to happen sometimes. And it's going to happen against a team like Manchester City. Right? This is the game they were supposed to lose. They lost by 3 goals. Certainly were not as competitive as you would have liked. But it's not like anybody was expecting to go into the Etihad and win. I know they've done it before. But I will take the team that loses this game and actually wins the games they're supposed to. And so far, Manchester United, except for those first couple, since Ten Hag got things going a little bit, they've been good in the games they're supposed to be, by and large. United being back, right, we use that phrase all the time, and United being title contenders are 2 different things. I still am of the belief this is the closest United has gotten to being back since Alex Ferguson left. I believe in what Ten Hag is doing. Ultimately, I think this is going to work out okay. That doesn't mean they're on Manchester City's level. It means you can trust them for a full season. They're not going to have these series of collapses and losing all of these games that they have no business losing like they have the past few seasons. I think they're going to end up being more consistent and have a really good shot at finishing top 4 with some of the struggles Chelsea are having, Liverpool injury issues and their slow start, and some of the issues Spurs are having. So I'm not going to fly off the rails and say United are back to being where they were at the very beginning of the season and that all the work they've done in the past month or so before that international break it's just all gone. I don't feel that way. This was a bad game on a team making progress, and progress isn't linear. And they also showed up against an absolute juggernaut. I don't think anybody could have done anything about that. The one major criticism outside of the players just not being good enough on the field, Erik ten Hag. If Casemiro was not bought to play in this game against this team, why in the world did you spend money on him? There is not a game on Manchester United's schedule this season I would rather have Casemiro in the starting lineup for than that one. And what you saw was the midfield got overrun, and Christian Eriksen got exposed from the fact that he's not a prototypical holding midfielder. It works when you have the balance and the defense is good enough to sort of support him, a la N'Golo Kante and Paul Pogba with France. It doesn't work when Scott McTominay is flying all over the field because both of the fullbacks are on yellow cards early in the game, and McTominay is just not up to it. He's trying his best. Casemiro would have solved some of these problems. So that's my one big criticism of Erik ten Hag is he's got to start. I just don't understand how you put a starting lineup out there that doesn't include Casemiro for this game. I don't care. The fact that you had won 4 in a row, unless there was a medical reason, Casemiro has to be in that starting lineup. That's really all I have to say. I think we just need to really, really appreciate how good Manchester City was in this game. I will say that one more time. And then the North London derby. Spurs didn't do much of anything until Thomas Partey scored that great goal to open and sort of get things going. And then all of a sudden, here comes Spurs actually trying to play a little bit. And what should not get lost in the penalty that Harry Kane ultimately converted was how good that passage of play was leading up to it. That was Spurs at their best. And they ultimately do. It kind of looked like it was going to fizzle out, but they pull it back together. They get the penalty. And then here come the mistakes. And this is really what I want to highlight about this game and then really put it in the context of Arsenal moving forward. The 2 decisive moments in this game came from Tottenham mistakes. First, Hugo Lloris on the Gabriel Jesus goal. Not entirely sure what happened there, but it simply has to be better. From the World Cup winner, from the guy wearing the captain armband. It has to be better. And then Emerson Royale, I'm going to say the exact same thing I said about Rob Holding the last time these two teams played. Do I think it was a red? No. Do I care? No, not particularly. You cannot put yourself in that position and allow the referee to make that decision. Mikel Arteta was bemoaning the second yellow on Holding. And now Antonio Conte is basically saying the exact same thing about this red card. Is it unlucky? Probably. But don't make that tackle. It was not without the, outside of the realm of possibility that was a red. You went from being in control of your future and your status in the game to putting it in the hands of a referee. That is on you, Emerson Royale. And so the bigger point I want to make here is last time these two teams played, as Arsenal were slowly throwing away this top 4 spot they had. We were talking about Rob Holding, about Arsenal not being mentally tough enough, and sort of these same narratives that consistently have been associated with Arsenal over the past few seasons. And now, that completely flipped on its head. It was Spurs making those mental mistakes, losing their composure, and Arsenal just calmly waiting to capitalize. And I also think Arsenal need to be applauded for their response in the Manchester United game, even though they didn't ultimately end up winning. I said that right after that. I wasn't concerned by that Arsenal performance. Arsenal had two problems last season. One, they just didn't quite know how to win yet. That is a process. I will say this until I go to the grave. You have to learn how to win, especially with a young team that hasn't experienced very much success because they haven't been around very long. You are going to go through stages of that. It's going to get a little bit better, but you're still going to have some lapses. And eventually, you'll get to the point where you figure it out. All their losses last season were in bunches. They had poor stretches, not poor games. Which is why I was so curious to see how they responded to that loss to Manchester United. And what did they do? Took care of business against Brentford, and then played exceptionally well in this game and got a victory they absolutely deserved. And then, as I've already highlighted the mental side of this, they are getting there. I think we are really, really close to having to fully acknowledge we need to talk about Arsenal differently. They need to do it for a little bit longer before I get to that point. But those are my two questions heading into this season. Can you be more consistent? And can you get mentally tougher and not fold in those situations and let emotions get the best of you the way they have in the past? And so far, they have checked both of those boxes for me. Does that mean they're going to challenge Manchester City? Not necessarily. I mean, that City team is, when they're at their best, unbelievable. I really, really don't think people understand how much better Holland makes them. At the same time, they're dropping points. They're not showing up and doing that every single week. So the door is still slightly open for somebody to make a run at them. And right now, if you're going to ask me who it is, it's Arsenal. Regardless, we are getting back to the point where we need to talk about Arsenal as one of the best teams in the Premier League and one of those teams in the title conversation, however you want to frame that. Whether it's kind of, can a third or fourth team get in there, sort of where Spurs were this season, or they are one of the favorites. They might just not be able to be there yet because of how good Manchester City is and how good Liverpool have been. But what we're not talking about Arsenal is, we're talking about them as top four hopefuls, not teams that should finish in the top four and might be able to get into the title conversation. That is slowly changing here. And it's a credit to Mikel Arteta, it's a credit to those players, and you saw it again in this North London derby. The way this played out was very, very telling for me, so I wanted to highlight that. A couple other things before I wrap up here. NWSL regular season is over. We have the playoff seeds and matchups for the first round set. Sort of a strange series of results here. Did not go as expected. North Carolina Courage have a chance to clinch a playoff spot with a win against a banged up San Diego Wave who don't have key players, including Alex Morgan. Can't get the goal, so they draw. Then the Portland Thorns have a chance to clinch the NWSL Shield. They can't do that against a Gotham team that has struggled mightily. So OL Reign is next up, and OL Reign take care of business and end up getting the number one seed and the NWSL Shield. North Carolina's draw meant that Chicago Red Stars, if they could take care of business against Angel City in the final game of the regular season, they were going to get that final playoff spot. Malpio scores a great goal. You get another really good goal. And they were pretty comfortable. You had a little bit of a scary moment. You concede a penalty, but Savannah McCaskill can't convert. Yuki Nagasoto adds the second goal. Brilliant solo effort. And so ultimately you end up getting what's a fairly comfortable 2-0 victory to clinch that final playoff spot, continue their playoff streak. So your seeds are as follow. 1, OL Reign. 2, Portland Thorns. 3, San Diego Wave. 4, Houston Dash. Congratulations to the Dash, first ever playoff appearance. And you get to host a playoff game, too. 5, Kansas City Current. 6, Chicago Red Stars. So your first round matchup, Chicago at San Diego, Kansas City at Houston, and then OL Reign and Portland Thorns get your buys. I do want to talk quickly about OL Reign here as the NWSL Shield champions, who have won 6 of their last 7 games, scored multiple goals in 6 of those 7 games, and are looking like the best team in the league, which is what most people, including myself, expected them to be, or at least thereabouts. They did what was ultimately expected of them. They just took a kind of strange route to get here. And for as loaded as this roster was at times in the season, and it still is loaded, but You added Tobin Heath, you added Kim Little. It's not quite the same here. Tobin Heath's injury, Kim Little goes back to England. It's more of the team you started the season with. Now you add Jordan Heidema, but it's not like this team is exponentially better on paper than they were at the beginning of this season. What has happened, though, is finally Laura Harvey actually figured out what her team was going to look like down the stretch, because from the injuries, from international duty, and the stretch of time you lost, your key players, when specifically the ones with the U.S., and then the fact that you're adding all of these high-profile players in the middle of the season and trying to integrate them, and then having to switch back once you lose them, at least a couple of them, there was no roster continuity whatsoever. Now, this last month and a half, finally got OL Rangers knew, okay, this is what we're going into the playoffs with. This is what we have to work with the rest of the season. And lo and behold, they start reeling off wins and sneak in to win the Shield. I feel like it's pretty rare that a team that wins the regular season comes in to the playoffs in this kind of form, right? Because usually winning a regular season Shield is all about consistency. And so, yeah, you've been good all season. You feel good about yourself heading into the playoffs. But most teams aren't coming in and having won 6 or 7. And by the way, the 7th was a draw. This is about as confident as I have ever felt in a number 1 seed in a knockout tournament. Between the form they're in, the confidence they have, and the fact that now everybody knows what this is going to look like and they've figured out how to make it work. To me, they are the clear frontrunners heading into the NWSL playoffs. They were the best team already on paper, and finally it's all clicking and working the way Laura Harvey wants. You can't ask for anything more if you're an OL Reign fan. They are huge, huge favorites in my mind. But it's also the playoffs, and there just is no rhyme or reason to anything, so we'll see what ends up actually happening. And then quickly, in Major League Soccer, a couple things I want to highlight. First, Seattle Sounders can't beat Sporting Kansas City and are not heading to the playoffs, which is a very strange statement to say, and one that I basically refused to believe until almost to the point where it actually was impossible for it to happen. Strange season. You win the CONCACAF Champions League. There was that stretch where it looked like they were going to get things going, and then it just kind of fell apart again. And then you were holding out hope because everybody else kept dropping points around them. You thought, well, if they can win out, last 2, 3, 4 games, they've got a real chance. And then they lose to Kansas City and have not been helping themselves. They didn't hold up their end of the bargain to even give themselves an opportunity heading into decision day. Ultimately, if you're a Seattle Sounders fan, if this is the price you're going to pay for becoming the first MLS team to win the CONCACAF Champions League, it is more than worth it. Is it an excuse for how poorly this team performed down the stretch? No, definitely not. It should, and Garth Lagerwey has been open about this, it should not be one or the other. They should be able to do both with the squad they have. But unfortunate injuries and just they didn't play well. So that is a bizarre thing. We are not going to have the Sounders in the playoffs. That in and of itself deserves a moment of my time. Then, LAFC, Supporters Shield winners, congratulations. Steve Cherundolo, the ability to regroup after last season and decide it's time for a fresh start, time to part ways with Rob Bradley, retool the roster a little bit, and then add your big-time international stars. And LAFC were able to clinch because the Union lost in Charlotte, but they did not just lose, they got thoroughly outplayed. That was a phenomenal Charlotte performance. If they can find a way to sneak in, I feel like they could be really, really dangerous. You don't want to, if they find a way to somehow pull this off and get into the playoffs, you do not want them as a first-round opponent. On the LAFC side, though, that's where, of course, we need to focus here. One thing I want to say, and I'll talk about this more when we get into the playoffs, but I wanted to mention it now that they are Supporters Shield champions. Steve Cherundolo had the luxury of not feeling obligated or not needing to rely on Giorgio Chiellini and Gareth Bale during the regular season. You know, Bale has barely started. He's just come off the bench sometimes, played, 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, scored a couple goals. And playing, at least once a week, if not twice, on different surfaces, allowed Cherundolo to balance and rotate all of these guys so that all of his attacking players got the playing time they needed. All the way down to Mahalo Opoku. Now, you're in a very different situation because you are going 90 minutes by 90 minutes in the playoffs. And one bad decision could cost you your season. Cherundolo's job is going to get much, much, much more difficult. The whole point was to build Gareth Bale and Giorgio Chiellini up for the playoffs. So is Bale starting? Because if Bale's starting, who's going to the bench? It's not going to be Carlos Vela. Are you going to tell Chicho Arango he's going to the bench? Is it Dennis Blanco, who you just brought in as a designated player and scored the goal that got you the shield? How do you balance all of this? Right? The grand experiment was, we have a team that's capable of winning the Supporters' Shield already. So we don't need to rely on Chiellini and Bale to get us there. We're the best team in this league without them. We're going to add them to give us that extra element heading into the postseason, and that we can slowly work them in so that by the time we get to the playoffs, they're ready to go. Well, the playoffs are almost here. What is this actually going to look like? This is the part of the master plan that has always been the big question. Can you find a way to navigate all of these rotations and all of these players you have who all deserve to be starting? And can you make the right decisions and find a way to not hurt everybody's feelings when you only have 90 minutes at a time to play with? That is the massive challenge facing Steve Cherundolo. Because like I said, one mistake in there somewhere could end your season. And can you justify taking some of these players off the field with your season in jeopardy? Even if you feel like maybe that's the best decision, can you pull Gareth Bale in the 60th minute of a game to bring on whether it's one of your other, and specifically outside of those four, I'm going back to Opoku. He's been phenomenal. Can you justify taking one of the other four guys off the field to bring him on? Even if you feel like that is the best thing. What does this actually look like going 90 minutes by 90 minutes? This master plan was all built around sort of getting everybody ready to go for the playoffs. So, playoffs are here. What are you going to do, Steve Cherundolo? This is a massive, massive, massive test for a guy who's done a great job this season. That is all for the weekend roundup. I know this was a long one. There was so much to get to. Thank you for sticking with it. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the other content I'm putting up on YouTube. And I'll see you next time.